Thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to hand this off to Sophie Burchell, our our Alaska Fellow at the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. She is going to introduce our presenter for today.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie, and welcome to our firewood harvesting in the interior class. Today we'll learn from Jessie how to optimize your firewood harvest in interior Alaska. Whether you've been using firewood for many years or like starting to use wood to heat your home, this class will give you helpful information for the healthy practice of using wood heat. We'd like to thank Alaska Housing Finance Corporation for sponsoring our spring class series. They make these free classes possible, and we're really grateful for their support. We'll have a question and answer section at the end of the presentation, but Jessie says feel free to jump in with any questions you may have. You can pop it in the chat and we'll kind of bring it to Jessie's attention. Or you can like raise your hand or unmute yourself, I think would also work. And to introduce Jessie Young-Robertson is a research associate professor at the Institute of Agricultural Natural Resources and Extension at UAF and the co-director of research in the Forest Soils Lab. Jessie is an expert in ecohydrology, terrestrial ecosystems, and the role of boreal and Arctic plants in the water cycle. Her research focuses on how changes in the boreal and Arctic systems, from climate change, shifts in plant species, permafrost thaw, etc., affect the dynamics of how plants move, store, and flux water. So without further ado, we're excited to hear from Jessie today about her research. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Looks like someone mentioned in the chat that the poll went away. Thought I'd bring that up. Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. You see that all right? Yep. Okay. Okay, so definitely let me know if you can't see something or there's any issue with visibility. Today I'll talk to you about understanding tree water content in order to optimize your firewood harvesting in interior Alaska. And I want to acknowledge my colleague on this, Matt Robertson. He's a research professional here in the lab. We both co-direct the activities of the lab, and he was really integral to this project. And we were funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture McIntyre Stennis program. Just real quick on the background of the Forest Soils Lab. So we've been around since about 1963. We're one of the oldest labs on campus. So generally what we look at is boreal forest growth and production. We look at stress, we look at water use in response to insects, including like the leaf miner and the bark beetle, and the response to environmental conditions. So we both do basic, so fundamental and applied research questions related to water use and productivity. So today this will be sort of a culmination of that water use stuff. I just finished our lab website. So here it is, alaska-forestsoilslab.com. The different approaches that we use. We have one of the largest field site networks in the boreal forest in the world. We measure climate, soil, and tree data at these sites. We do regular weekly field visits that measures like plant physiology and other variables. We use drones and we use stable isotopes and tree rings and data modeling and all this stuff to understand what's going on. We have different partnerships. We partner with One Tree Alaska. Those of you who harvest birch sap might be aware of them. The Alaska State Division of Forestry with OTNA, Northern Arizona, and the UAF Geophysical Institute. So for our firewood project, again, this is related to an extension of our boreal forest understanding of water use and movement. I want to back up and give you some background on it. So in general, the energy stored in our terrestrial plants is 3 to 4 times greater than the global demand for energy in 2014. That statistic blew me away. I hadn't considered that. And so forests are these renewable resources that are really integral to heating homes, particularly where other sources are unavailable or just too expensive to access, which we can all relate to. So firewood is a really important part of Alaskan culture, and it's needed to heat our homes in these really cold winters. And of course, it reduces our energy costs. we all know how expensive it is. So generally, we have soft and hardwood species locally available. Although people tend to prefer the hardwood species, birch. It tends to burn longer and it's better for overnight heating. And also there's leftover coals give off radiant heat, and it can be easier to restart the fire in the morning. But there's also our softwood species like white spruce, and that's really readily utilized. We have very low forest diversity here, and so we're kind of limited to the species that we can use. So we know that the FNSB standards for wood is that wood has to be at 20% for firewood that is sold or burned. So I've noticed there's generally two camps of folks who have thoughts on this. Camp one are folks that want to reduce PM 2.5, so our air pollution, which we'll talk about in a minute, and also get the most from their wood for heating. So that's the energy that we get from our wood. Camp two are people that are more focused on getting the most of from their wood for heating. So set up the problem here. So the problem that was motivating this project is we're all aware of the winter air pollution problems here. There are times that we've been considered to be worse than Beijing. So this is a huge challenge. And of course, I'm referring to the PM 2.5 issues. Here are just some studies about that. So there's three main contributing factors. One is that it's something we can't do anything about, right? So we get inversions, which you can see in these pictures here, and that's due to our climate and the topography of this basin area. And so essentially we end up with this lid over the valley that just fills with pollution from cars, but also from wood smoke. The second issue is that a lot of folks do have inefficient wood burning stoves. Now the borough did do a wood change out or stove change out program, but not everyone participated in it, and we still have enough inefficient wood burning stoves floating around that it's contributing to the issue. The third issue that we're talking about here is the burning of green wood. And so green wood is wood that's greater than 20% water content. And the average water content of burned wood in Fairbanks is about 38%. So it's pretty high. So I do want to talk about PM 2.5 a little bit in terms of why it's such a health issue. So mortality, human mortality increases by 8 to 18% for every 10 microgram per meter square increase in PM 2.5 over the limits. And so what that means is that there are 11.5 to 23.5 more preventable deaths in the Fairbanks North Star Borough per year due to the high PM 2.5 levels. So it is a significant health issue. And every 10% increase in wood water content, like from 20 to 30%, increases our PM 2.5 by 67% when burned. So PM 2.5 issues do contribute to very significant health problems in this area. And that wood water content of 20% is really the best compromise between producing low PM 2.5 and high heat output. So the wetter the wood that you have, the less heat that's produced, the lower the BTUs, or the British thermal units is how it's described. And the other thing to consider is when you're looking at your wood stove, the combustion efficiency is reported by your manufacturer of the wood burning stove. But the efficiency, this is what's important to keep in mind about that. The efficiency rating of your wood burning stove, that combustion efficiency, is only accurate for low moisture fuels. So the combustion efficiency will actually be lower than the manufacturer ratings when you're burning wood that is greater than 20% water content. So that's something to consider about your wood stove and understanding of your heating sources. So now we'll get to the project. So what we're doing here is we're taking our understanding of seasonal tree water content, which we'll see some graphs of that. And we want to use that information to optimize when we can harvest firewood in order to reduce our overall drying time and ultimately contribute to a greater reduction in winter air pollution. Now, we can't specifically impact that with just telling you all about our wood water contents. That's a community activity to reduce winter air pollution, but that hopefully is the ultimate goal here. So here's our approach, and I promise I'll try not to have too many busy slides going forward here. But what we did is we installed a field site near Goldstream Valley, actually at our house, and we developed a Firewood website for data viewing and sharing. The tree water content sensors at our house doesn't output when it's below freezing because those numbers are uncalibrated at this point. So if it's below freezing, you won't see data output, but we're getting to the output time. So what we did is we harvested wood, birch, and white spruce from wood lots that are accessed by the general public at different times of year when the trees are at different starting water contents. And then we split and stacked the wood and we placed them under a shelter outside in typical conditions of a Fairbanks household. So you can see in the right-hand side of this slide here, there's this picture of the stacks of wood. So those are the cords of wood that we collected. I think they're actually half a cord in each one. But anyway, what we did is we monitored the water loss of these stacks of wood via weight loss. So all of these stacks are sitting on big scales. So we're monitoring that weight loss over time. And then we're also measuring the water content of the wood with sensors that we've embedded in the wood. And then we also measured the air temperature and relative humidity near the stacks. So that helps us know sort of the conditions around these stacks. And then they're all kind of under this shelter and they're parked at the farm. And then with Dr. Joe Little, he's at Northern Arizona University, we're developing a public survey of whether the public will actually find any of this information to be useful. So let's talk about data. So I do have several graphs to show you, but I'll just step through each one so that we're all on the same page. So this is a graph that's showing some of our field data. So this is for birch, and this black line here, that's actually the tree water content in real time coming out of one of our sites. This green line here, that's actually showing the growth of the tree. We have these sensors that can really pick up on growth on a very fine time scale. And these blue bars at the bottom, those are rainfall. And this is going from about April 19th, 2020, all the way through end of September 2022 to end of September 2022. So I noted some points on this graph. So if we just follow this black line, which is the tree water content, what we see is in the spring, it increases and the birch trees get like just completely full of water. And that is this uptake of snow melt. And they're doing it during this time here until they get totally full of water. So for those of you all who tap the trees for sap, this is the key time for doing this activity. And then right around this time here, we get bud burst. And one way we can really know that happens is the water content just starts plummeting. And that's because the trees are blowing that up into the air. And you'll notice during this time of year, you'll get a lot of the cumulative clouds, the big puffy clouds, and that's coming from the trees. That's what's going on there. And then we reach kind of our low water content in July here. And then once growth stops here, water content starts going up. And the trees will actually just take on a bunch of water. And even what you can't see here is after the birch drop their leaves, they take on a ton of water and they'll get super saturated again right before winter. This green graph shows when growth starts, which is right here, and when it ends right here. And so you can see how it lines up with bud burst. And then when the tree stops growing, the reason why it looks like it keeps increasing in size is because they fill up with water. Like they just keep filling up. So that's what the birch look like. And these arrows are to point out, you can imagine if you harvested at these different times a year, you would have very different starting water content. If you harvested at this time of year in the spring, you'd have a very full tree, like very full. And so you're gonna have to dry your wood a whole lot longer, which we'll get to that. So this is white spruce. You see that here at the beginning, they also take up a bunch of snow melt. And here you can see where their growth starts and where it ends. So you might ask yourself, first of all, okay, if I harvest at these different times a year, will it really matter? But really what we're asking ourselves is the water content really this consistent? So when we cut down a tree in March, this is what it looked like. The outer layers of the tree were like 120% water content by weight. The middle of the tree was 32%. So what the tree is doing is it's moving water outward into the living tissue, a little more out here. And so our sensors were mainly picking up this wet part. So what we're doing is we've put sensors in that are also picking up the dry part. So no, it's not this consistent, just the outer layer is, and we'll have to get back to you on that. So next I'm going to show you a video before I get to more graphs. And this is a video of a stack of wood drying over the course of a year. And it's very relaxing to watch, so I hope you lean into that. But the other is that I want you to notice the wood checking on the ends, because some people use the checking of the ends as an indicator it's close to being dry, but that wood checking occurs mainly in the first few weeks when it's definitely not dry yet. So I just ask you to keep an eye on that. So I'm gonna go ahead and start. Here we are going, we're in September, we're shrinking, but now we're below freezing. Going here, and now we're getting above freezing and starts shrinking again because we're losing more water. And now we're kind of reaching a part where they're settling down. So a lot of that checking that occurred in here occurred really early on. It's relaxing. So the next few slides, I'm going to show you that the weight loss of those stacks over time. In this first set here, I'm showing you birch on the top and white spruce on the bottom. Each of these lines represents a different harvest, different time of year. I'm showing this to you right in this sort of context because birch and white spruce have the same patterns. So I'm only going to show you the birch graphs just to keep it simple, but I'll give you data for both birch and white spruce. So now let's just step through this graph. So on this axis here, that's the weight of that stack. So this is like 3,200 pounds, etc. Across the bottom, we obviously have time. So each of these lines, the date at the top represents when this stack was harvested. So end of May, so this is after leaf out, end of July, end of September, and around the 3rd week of March. And this is before snowmelt. This blue time here, that's the time period that's below freezing, and that'll be important. So the first thing to notice is that where these weights are doesn't represent the initial water content. There's a reason for that, but the starting water contents are different between these harvest dates. For birch, you can see that these are the starting water contents, very, very far from 20%. So they differ across dates. The spruce is like incredibly wet. And so we're determining the starting water contents for these dates here. But we can see that normally here in May, they're like at 118% water content. So they start out super, super wet, but all of these are wet. So we start at different places. Then, and I think this part's really cool, for the May and July harvest, so May and July, we see that in the first like few weeks to month or month and a half, they lose almost 1,000 pounds of water. I mean, that's an enormous amount of water that's just lost in this first initial time period, right after they've been stacked, split and stacked. And so when I gave this talk at the Wood Energy Conference, the folks that, one of the folks that ran the kiln or runs a kiln was really interested in the fact that by the sole action of collecting your wood, splitting it, stacking it right away, you can drive off a ton of moisture, literally, very quickly. The second thing is, so this, I darkened this line here because by the time freeze up occurs, which is this dark line here, the different harvests differ in the amount of water lost relative to where they started. So for spruce, for the May harvest, they've lost 4/5 of their water by the time we hit freezing. Birch lose about 3/4 of their water. This July harvest, the spruce have lost 1/3 of their water, so have the birch by the time we hit freeze up. And then this September one, they lost like 1%, so very little. So then at this exact same time again, by the time freeze up occurs, the amount of water remaining, so for spruce, we're at about 24.5% and birch we're at about 20%. I put an asterisk next to the spruce because basically as we continue to like finalize all the drawings, anything under 25%, we think is actually pretty close to 20% because of how basically moisture spreads out in the stack and so on and so forth. And so an asterisk is there because we're looking at anything under that under 25% is actually probably being close to 20%, which we'll be able to finalize by the fall. So this July harvest, the spruce reached 80% water content and the birch reached 53%. So we still have a long ways to go. And then September harvest, they're like nowhere near 20%. The spruce are like 109% and the birch are 83%. So we're like way, way, way far away. Over the winter, no freezing, or sorry, no drying occurs. Like none, maybe 1%. But by and large, there's no drying over the winter. So we can't rely on those months to dry our wood at all, period. And I think that's like what I thought was interesting about this is it seemed like it was new information for some folks that who had dried wood for a long time. So I'm glad we were able to show data to support that. Now this time of year, this dark line here, that's when we're getting above freezing temperatures again, and that's when drying begins again. And these values here are the final water contents by October here, which is right over here on the right. By October 1st, these are final water contents. So that May harvest reaches 17 and 14%. The July harvest reaches 20 and 17%. Our September harvest is still drying. And our March harvest, again, before snowmelt, is reaching 20 to 24%, which again, that's probably closer to 20%. I wanted to show that data a little bit differently. So if we move along time here from left to right, so here, right before snowmelt, if you harvest before snowmelt, it takes about 6 to 6.5 months to reach 20% for spruce and about 20 to 24% for birch. If you harvest after bud burst, so end of May, it takes about 4.5 months to reach 20% water content for birch and about 20 to 25% for spruce. If you harvest at the end of July, it's going to take you over a year to reach 20%. And if you harvest in September, they're not done drying. So I'll have to get back to you on what that drying schedule will be. If we ask ourselves why these differences, especially in the summer, so in July, we think the issue is that it's harvested later. So we're missing those critical June, July months for rapid drying because it's been pretty hot and dry in June and July. So we're missing that there. And for September, it's harvested later and there's just no time to dry before freeze up. So it just kind of sits there until the following year. So it's just a lot less efficient. So here's some preliminary take homes. So wood checking is not a good indicator of dryness. Very minimal drying occurs over the winter. So harvesting just before winter is really not that helpful if you're concerned about getting dry wood quickly. Split and stack your wood right after harvesting. You're going to get your greatest water loss in those first couple months after harvesting, unless those 2 months overlap with below freezing air temperatures or sort of cooler, high humidity summer conditions, so like August. Harvesting in March before snowmelt or May before after bud burst really reduces your overall drying time to reach or get very close to your borough standards. So compared to midsummer, harvesting in late May decreases your drying time by 9.5 months. And harvesting in March decreases your drying time by 7.7 months. And this is really significant. And this is something that really surprised us. So that's pretty exciting. So sort of file it away. If you can get out in March before snowmelt, go for it. That's a great time to do it. If you have to get out in late May, of course, that brings up some other issues that I'll get to. So some caveats. The woodlot trees that we sampled from are wetter than wild trees, so trees not in woodlots, if the woodlot has been heavily picked over. So wild trees or areas that are not picked over, those trees are going to start with lower water content, so you'll have overall shorter drying times. Our study is based on cutting and stacking wood with proper airflow under cover shortly after harvesting, as is recommended by the borough. So if you harvest your wood and just kind of leave it on the ground, then or just don't split it and stack it, you're going to have different results. If we have a summer of rain all the time and high humidity, like all summer long, that changes the drying time. So always check your wood water content. Our harvest dates are dependent on access to woodlots and logging road accessibility. So that's why like May can sometimes be an issue, even July. So that's where that March date can be really helpful. Even though it's snowy, hopefully you can get in. And we'll have final drying schedules when the project is done, which is around fall 2024. But we're feeling pretty solid in the data we're sharing, except that sort of ones where I talked about 20 to 24%, we're going to narrow in on that value much more closely, and it's probably going to be closer to 20%. So I will talk a little bit about how to properly measure your wood water content. This is from the Borough and DEC websites. Only measure unfrozen wood. Sometimes folks measure frozen wood. It's not going to give you very accurate readings. The recommendation is measuring on 3 freshly split pieces for each cord. So select that wood from different parts of the stack. And the borough recommends make a fresh cut across the grain and measure them in the middle of that cut and do it kind of quickly because it evaporates pretty quickly. Use an approved moisture meter and read those directions for proper use and ensure it reads 20% or less when you measure your plant. These are the DEC approved moisture meters. I actually Googled around to try to find prices just to get a sense of like availability. Goodness sakes, I don't know who would buy this DigiSense, or actually, sorry, I don't know who would buy this Delmhorst. It's like $400. I guess if you really get into your craft, like get it. But this one's found on Amazon, and this is the one the borough gave us to kind of play around with. And they have a range of suggestions, make sure your meter measures up to 40%. Use the two-prong design. Get ones with replaceable prongs in case yours wear out. Make sure it's easy to use and affordable. They're available, like I said, this is on Amazon, and so forth. So what's next for us? We want to get those drawing schedules out there for folks, and make it easy to access. And we want to analyze our data for a peer-reviewed publication for science. We want to quantify that white spruce water content with the longer probes, because like I said, like here you can see in this picture down here, it's pretty dynamic. We want to determine the PM 2.5 and BTUs of wood at different water contents, just to get that out there. And we also want to determine the role of stand density on water content and growth, because I thought this was neat. So this is a white spruce from one of the woodlots we sampled from. And what we found, and this, anyone in forestry will know this very, very well, but you see about 8 years ago is when this lot was pretty heavily cleared. And so what we see is that once that competition is freed up around all these trees, they'll take on a ton of water for one thing, because there's less competition, but then they'll really grow. So the last 8 years of growth is about as much as the prior 100 years of growth. So that's I don't know, I think it's really interesting, in particular how much water these guys will hold, and that will affect your wood harvesting for sure. If you're going for that one tree that's not surrounded by any other tree, it's going to be totally full of water. So what we've just submitted is a proposal to study the impact of thinning on the productivity and water and competition of forest stands in the boreal forest. I do want to make one plug for one project we're doing that might be of interest for folks in Alaska. Is we're working on the spruce bark beetles. And we're looking at the indicators of the early attack phase to support state forestry and doing some mitigation. We don't do the mitigation, they do, but they need the information. And how can this be monitored using drones? This is a partnership with Department of Forestry and OTNA, because a lot of this attack is occurring on OTNA land. And so we've all seen it, right? When we've driven past Denali Park is all of that tree death. So we have all these sites established and doing measurements to figure out what's happening as the trees die. And in terms of what might be interesting to this group, we're doing future work with, we're working with Department of Forestry and U.S. Forest Service to determine how long after infestation are the trees viable for other uses like firewood and lumber, sort of these other products. So that's all I got. Should I stop sharing?
Up to you. We'll open it up for questions. I see a comment from Ilya. He says, just an FYI, we picked up a Delmhorst on eBay for about $75.
Ooh,
Great. Thanks, Ilya.
get it. Yeah, for sure. What's the
That's a good tip.
prices?
Anyone with questions can raise their hand, put them in the chat, unmute yourself, whatever works.
Oh, someone says they cannot unmute. Let me see if that's.
What about now?
Good now. Thanks.
Oh, Gail, do you have
Gail,
Was Elias going to talk still?
You go first.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that was great. Thank you very much. And I can't wait until your data is out there in a form that the public will actually read.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm working with CCHRC. Sophie's been great to put out I keep saying publicly digestible. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, a format that people want to read and look at. But yeah, thank you for sure.
Yeah, just an FYI, I guess our rule of thumb has been to go, 2 full summers because we didn't know. So it would be, I think, very useful to see that broken out into some general terms where, once you guys get your data all sorted and feel pretty confident, like, hey, or maybe give it a spread. If you cut it this month, then you have to. I like that the public, since I deal with the public in education, I think that a simple like process like that, like a table or something, would be super useful. Or just and one maybe general statement. I'm not, what we did was just a guess, and we figured, well, 2 full summers has to be safe. One summer might be pushing it, and you've kind of validated that depending on when it gets cut.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what we're hoping for, is to provide just very clear results of, like, if you harvest at this time, it will be very likely this number of months. I have to add the caveats because in science we get so uncomfortable sharing data without caveats. But yeah, it gives me heartburn. But yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that input, and it definitely makes me think about, how can we get this out as clearly and concisely as possible that people can use it as rules of thumb while they're also still measuring their wood appropriately.
Yep, exactly. Oh, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
We have a question from Joseph. Oh,
go ahead.
When the spruce trees are infested and die, are they safe to harvest and burn for firewood?
Safe in terms of not bringing the critters into your home is what I'm guessing. If that's a really good question. And I mean, if it's safe about the not bringing bugs into your, just for air quality. So if it's a water content question, here's what we noticed about the beetle kill that we monitored last summer, is that bugs too. Is that we noticed that, so the trees start dying within 2 weeks of being attacked. They start basically choking on the fungus that invades their xylem. And so what we noticed is that by the end of the summer, they're pretty much, the sciencey word is cavitated, but it means that they're pretty choked up in terms of actually being able to use their water anymore. And so what that means for that question is that we think that the water content that they're at when they're finally dead at the end of the summer is a water content they'll be at like until somebody cuts them down. And that could still be a pretty high water content. And so if anyone harvests beetle killed wood, you'd probably still need there's a good chance you would need to dry it some more before burning it. I don't know if hopefully that addresses that question. And then in terms of bugs, I don't know the bug question. It would be a concern about bringing bugs into your house. And so I'm not sure about that part, but that's something that's sort of come up in my brain that I keep forgetting to ask an expert about.
I looked at a flat roof failure, did an investigation with a structural engineer this spring, and the homeowner had stored almost a full cord of wood that was freshly cut in the previous fall in that house, and the moisture loading that it put into that flat roof, which was about 20 feet by 36 feet, was absolutely incredible. What ran out of there in early April when the temperatures got warm. So that's another one of those public service things that people don't realize just how much moisture is in that wood when they store it indoors. Word of caution, I guess.
Yeah, that actually just gave me a little bit of heartburn when you said that. I was like, goodness sakes, because it's so much water, and we were just blown away by the huge amount of weight, which is water, that's lost in that first even month of just putting it out there, moving just a ton of water from that. It's because the wood is so wet that it just wants to evaporate the second you split it. So somebody stored this in their house. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it leaked up into the roof because stack effect, air leakage transports all that water vapor into the roof assembly. And if the roof assembly can't dry out, which flat roofs are just terrible at, it all just essentially condensed and formed frost in those joist bays, right? All winter
Oh.
long until that magical couple days came along, and then it instant liquid water. And so, yeah, you don't know till spring, but it does it was an education for us too, just how much how much water there was.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's terrible.
Any other questions tonight? Okay then.
All right, well, yeah. Before we leave you, or while there's just a couple more questions, I'm just going to start our exit poll. We can still have a couple more questions while you guys do this. Thank you so much.
I think Gail has a question.
Go for it.
Sorry, the poll covered me up. I was just going to make a remark that, it was 40 plus years ago, we built a log house. And that log house spent all winter shedding water into the house, so that every morning we peeled ice off of the visqueen windows we had then.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, that's the same as storing the firewood in your house, right?
Mhm.
But it's not, the logs weren't even split,
Goodness. That sounds stressful, Gail.
It was fine. It was, as my father said, you're young.
So the structure of your house, the logs, what I'm taking from that is the logs were pretty wet then.
I guess they were, and I was told that they'd been dry, but they weren't split. They're just house logs, so they
Oh.
take much longer to dry.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Oh, so they ever stop dripping into your house? Like, did that ever stop?
Yes, but it took 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. And those when these trees are harvested in the field, like, for like the beetle kill, for example, right? How, these trees, when they're standing dead or just standing in general, they rarely get as dry as we need them to be for our various applications. And so, having other ways to dry them or have enough time, but that sounds super stressful. Oh, I got a question. Does it harm us directly if we burn wet wood, like if there's nothing else to use, especially out in the wild for campfires? I mean, I guess campfires are outside kind of dealing with it, but anytime you burn wet wood, you have that high particulate matter, even if you're outside burning wet wood. At least when you're outside, the wind could be blowing. Usually the smoke in your face is sort of seems to be my experience of campfires, but anytime you're burning that wet wood, it's that particulate matter gets deep in your lungs, and it's harmful for human health. But campfires, we're not around it for very long necessarily, might be a couple hours at night while we're like having our meal or something. And so if you're not doing that every single day, all day, I'm sure that's, going to be minimal impact, but it's something to just remember. Also, if someone has asthma or other pre-existing conditions, that's when that PM 2.5 can be particularly bad. But definitely keep going camping and making fires and enjoying yourself. It's just something to remember.
Have you had any conversations with the borough air quality people or anybody involved that where they could say, hey, if everybody actually burned, properly dried wood in efficient wood stoves like the Blaze Kings or, catalytic stoves that meet the borough's more stringent standards, would that allow us to burn wood again? Would we get back into good air quality, or is there a general feeling that it doesn't matter how well we do, we're still going to have like burn ban days? Do you know?
I haven't, the guy I was in contact with there has moved on to another position, and so I haven't talked to them in probably about a couple of years, but when we have a results, we'll talk to them again. But so here was my sense of it, is that if everybody in town got on board with this and was good about what stove they were using and good about burning 20% water content, it would drastically improve our air quality. I mean, we'll always have the car emissions and some of the other crap going on, but like it would really improve our air quality, so there'd be less of the issues with no burn days. Please don't quote me on that, but that was my understanding in conversations with the borough. But in conversations with the borough, it sounds like it's definitely been like a real battle, because there are folks that don't think the pollution is that big of a deal, or just no matter what, burn whatever wood, don't tell me what to do sort of thing. And so it's a complicated social issue. But going back to your original question, if everybody got on board, and we have a lot of new folks coming to town, with the new planes at the military installation. If all the new folks coming to town also had this understanding and were on board with it, if everyone got on board with it, I think my understanding is we'd have far fewer no burn days. And part of my understanding with the military as well is they're trying to get folks to live more in town to improve the mental health of the soldiers. So, just getting more information out there for new folks. But I don't know if that answers your question, but that was my understanding.
No, it does. Thank you. Yeah, just trying to get your sense for it because you're kind of involved in it pretty deeply, and it's encouraging anyway. Thank you.
Yeah. Looks like free tip, removing bark from split birch greatly speeds drying. Yeah, it's a good point, Jim, for sure. And one thing we wanted to look at was taking the bark off, but then the other technician on the project was like, we don't have the capacity to do that. But yeah, it is definitely. The other thing that people do is they cut a tree down and just let the tree leaf out and let it like dry itself while it's lying there on the ground. It's actually not an efficient way to go. That it really doesn't dry the wood very well at all. So let's see. They're trying to have restrictions in order to replace all wood burning stoves overall and replace them with fuel burning ones. Is that reality? I don't know about that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Any sense of the moisture content from commercially available pellets in Fairbanks? Good question. I don't know about that either. Yeah. But the thing about the fuel burning stoves too, like from what I've just kind of casually heard in conversation with people, is just what I mentioned very initially today is like harvesting wood and burning wood is such a big part of the local culture. I've talked to people who like really focus on, harvesting wood is like it's as close to their hearts as hunting is the way I would put it, and so it's such a big part of the culture that I think some people would have a real tough time just moving to fuel burning stoves unless it's totally mandated. But that's just been my take from talking to some folks. Yeah, like I see Joseph. Yeah, for some people, wood harvesting is like the event to go do that. And this is what we're doing. We're splitting, we're stacking. This is what we're doing for the next week. So yeah, it is important.
Any other questions? Okay. Nope. Just coming.
Oh, that's cool. 1,000 square feet, tight wall insulated ventilated with HRV calculated 3.5 cords. Nice.
Yeah, my partner Haley we both work for the research center, and so we run the energy modeling software to figure out heating oil, and when we're designing for rural communities and such, the CCHRC homes, it's really nice to know. But the modeling software also lets us convert that into BTUs produced by wood. So for us, that was really nice. And yeah, we use the Delmhorst, we dry the way the burrow does and all that stuff. So we've done all that part of it right. And yeah, we're just about at exactly 3.5 cords this winter. So
Oh, that's great. Yeah, one thing I didn't mention is, there's a lot of homes that aren't very well insulated, or the degree that they could be. Maybe they're older homes or whatever, and renovating a house for that's really tough. And so that can really add to a huge amount of wood use. And so it's important to get as much energy out of your wood as possible. It saves money and it saves your back. That's cool. I have to check out that energy model. We built our own house, and my spouse is really into that. That's awesome. Thank you. Oh, cool. Grab that. I click on the link. There we go. Nice. That's awesome. Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for your interest in this. And there'll definitely be, this project is ending at the end of September, and we're just like finalizing stuff and being very anally retentive about the data that we put out there. And then, yeah, I definitely want to make it available to anyone that wants it. And all of this information that I shared today, I want to make available to anyone who wants it. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. Your research was really fascinating. It clearly sparked a lot of interest and questions from everyone here, and definitely excited to share it more with Fairbanks as well. So if there aren't any other questions, we'll just say thank you again to AHSC for partnering with CCHRC to support this class. Everyone, please keep an eye out for our other collaborations with Jessie, and also our other spring classes that will take place probably later in the spring, early summer. And mark your calendars for Fairbanks Housing Action Week, also looking at kind of health and housing, and also design and insecurity in housing in our community. That's March 18th to 22nd. And if you go to cchrc.org, you can find information about all of those things. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming tonight. And thank you again, Jessie, for sharing your research with us.
Thanks to CCHRC for doing this. This is really fabulous. And thanks for everyone for attending. Appreciate it.